lived in a small fishing village as a child, and one day there was an accident out at sea. Everyone stopped fishing to find the guy whose boat had capsized, but in the end, nobody was able to find him. Hoping he might miraculously return, the other fishermen lit a fire on a small embankment by the harbour and kept it burning throughout the night. As the night wore on, we all started to head back home, and when my father grabbed my hand for us to leave as well, suddenly the missing fisherman's grandmother said something. "He's back." Everyone turned around in surprise and we could hear the sound of water dripping. The sound approached the fire. "You must be cold. Get closer. Warm yourself up now," the old woman said. Everyone froze and remained silent. I couldn't see anything, and it seemed I wasn't alone in that. But we all knew that, somehow, someone was there. "You don't have to worry anymore. We'll find you tomorrow," the old woman said. And just like that, the feeling in the air changed, and the presence disappeared. The next morning, his body was found caught in a net by the shore. Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. In case you missed it, Toshiden Exploring Japanese Urban Legends Volume 4 is now available. Once again, there are a host of new legends to explore, both horrifying, bizarre, and otherwise. And of course, a new season of the podcast that has just wrapped up. So, if you haven't checked it out yet, it's available right now. You can also find the audiobook for the first volume of Toshiden, either on our Patreon, Fourth Wall store, or various audiobook outlets, including Spotify and Audible. So don't miss out on that either if you're still looking for more. This week, we're heading out to sea for some horrifying tales of ghosts, monsters, gods, and other terrifying things that lurk out on the water. Did you know that 80% of Japan's population is said to live in coastal areas? That's a lot of opportunities to encounter something terrifying out in the ocean. First up, a fisherman heads out to sea one day like he always does, but when he doesn't return that night, his son grows worried. However, when he does eventually return, it would seem that something bizarre happened out there that nobody is able to explain. Find out why in Treasure Ship. I think I was in the 5th grade when this happened. Around the start of May, as spring was well underway, my father started heading out on his fishing trips to catch sea bream. He set out around 5 a.m, but he always came home at different times. Sometimes it was 4 p.m, other times it was 10 or 11. I was usually asleep when he left, but sometimes he accidentally woke me up, so we'd drink coffee together before he left. As such, I was rather familiar with his routine before leaving. He would always wash his face, brush his teeth, shave, drink coffee, and then leave the house with 5 or 6 rice balls, some ice, water, and sake. One day, he left as usual. I was asleep at the time. My mother, younger brother, and I went about our day as usual, but by 11 p.m. that night, our father still hadn't returned. "Sometimes he's late," my mother said. "He's probably already back but gone somewhere else for now." But I was still worried, so I called my uncle. We left my sleepy brother behind and my uncle drove us to the harbour. My father's boat was gone, and his car still in the lot where he'd left it that morning. "He might have had an accident," my uncle told my mother, and as I sat next to him, I felt like crying. Either way, it was too late to do anything about it, so we decided to go home and then visit the Coast Guard the next day. But unlike my father, my mother was a rather withdrawn person and she wasn't brave enough to visit them alone. As such, she had to wait for my uncle, who had an appointment in the morning, and go there together with him around lunchtime. Of course, I was worried about my father, so I wanted to find him right away. I'll go right now, I screamed. But they sent me to bed and I had to wait. Naturally, I didn't go to school the next day. I waited for my uncle, growing more and more irritated. But when the door opened, it was my father. Water, ramen, and rice was the first thing that came out of his mouth. Honestly, it was rather stupid, but I threw myself at my father, bawling my eyes out. At the time, I didn't realize it, but as my mother silently put together some ramen for him and placed it before him, I stopped crying and stared at my father's face. His beard had grown quite long. He wasn't quite a bear or anything like that, but it was far longer than you would expect it to grow in a single day or two. "Dad, your beard is long," I said as he shoved the ramen into his face. "Yeah, I haven't shaved for about a week." When he was done eating, he sighed in contentment. Then he told us what happened to him. That day, according to him, it was around a week ago, he set out on his boat as usual. If anything, it was just a little foggier than usual. Around lunchtime, the fog cleared and the fish were biting well, so he figured he'd fish a little longer and then head back. Next time he looked at the time, it was around 3 or 4 p.m. Thinking it time to head back, he realized it had suddenly gotten much foggier again. It was so heavy that he couldn't tell front from back or left from right. Now, I don't know a lot about the sorts of instruments you can find on boats, but I do know that even in fog, you can use the instruments and signals and such to safely find your way back to port, as long as you're not too far out. There was no heavy fog warning today, so did I mess up my return time? My father thought. But that was about it. Then, as he tried to head back, he realized the instruments were all acting up. Panicking, he then checked the engine. It was the only thing that still seemed to be working. He stopped to think. Should he wait for the fog to pass? But that might take an hour or two, and it currently showed no signs of moving. He couldn't even send a distress signal because none of the boat's instruments were working, not even the wireless. He made up his mind. If he tried to move in this heavy fog, he'd just make things worse. He'd have to wait for it to clear. Once it did, he could search for other ships. He couldn't waste fuel, so he might have to wait for quite some time. And so, that night, he slept on the boat. When he woke up the next morning, the boat was still surrounded by fog. And so, in the fog, he started fishing again to pass the time. Of course, he occasionally checked the instruments, but they still weren't working. Then, sometime after lunch, the fog seemed to clear a little, and he noticed the silhouette of another boat nearby. Turning the engine on so the boat could at least move, my father then called out across the water, knowing it was unlikely they'd hear him either way. He then decided to move closer. Once the other ship came into view, my father was momentarily confused. Oh? Even from a distance, he could tell the ship was unusually shaped. It was, according to him, a treasure ship, like the type the 7 gods of fortune were known to ride on. As it floated there between the fog, it looked like an old sailing ship out of a folk tale or something from antiquity. It looked just like the famed treasure ship of the 7 gods of fortune. Even as my father picked up speed in his boat, the treasure ship kept a steady distance from him. It never disappeared, but nor did it let him get near, so he was unable to get a good look at it. This dance went on for around half an hour before the treasure ship finally disappeared entirely into the fog. The next day, at around the same time, that ship appeared again, and as my father followed it, it again disappeared into the fog. Day after day, my father ate the fish he caught and carefully rationed his water and sake. When the treasure ship appeared around lunchtime, he would then follow it. This went on for around a week. But then one day, the fog cleared and my father was able to see something different in the distance. Not the boat, but rather the shape of land. Then, the fog seemed to lift almost immediately, and the familiar sight of the harbour lay before him. At the same time, all the instruments on the boat started working again too. Kicking the engine into gear, my father safely made his way back to land. When my father was done with his story, I burst into tears. I was just an elementary school kid, so I didn't bother questioning anything he said. I was honestly just so glad he safely made it back. Looking back on it now though, it was honestly terrifying and strange. What on earth was that treasure ship my father encountered? What was all that fog? According to my father, there was no fog on the day he left, and there was no fog warning on the day he returned either, nor had any fog been spotted out on the waters nearby during that time. So where on earth did my father go? "Ebisu-san must have helped you," I said, to which my father boasted that, no, it must have been Benten-san. My father continued heading out into the ocean without issue after that, which I honestly respect. However, whenever he set out after that, he always made sure to carry some soy sauce with him. The villagers in this next story live in a small fishing village, but one day, a fisherman comes home with a new bride from the mountains. Being a handsome man who was already in demand, the local women are upset, but those feelings soon turn to confusion when the couple have a, well, strange child. Find out what's really going on in Pale Child. This is a story about the sea. Long ago, it was common for people from fishing villages to marry other people also from fishing villages. They were already used to the lifestyle, and their values were different to those who lived in the mountains. One day, A-san travelled to a village inland to discuss shipbuilding, and while there, he got quite close to one of the young women who lived there. In the end, they decided to get married. A-san was rather strong and handsome, so even back in his own village, numerous women had their sights set on him. Thus, his return with his soon-to-be bride left them rather disappointed. They soon got married and started a family. They had a son, then a daughter, and then another son. They were all healthy children, and because infant mortality was rather high in those days, they were overjoyed. But when their second daughter was born, the entire village was shocked. Unlike their other children, this girl was incredibly pale. And as she grew up, they were even more shocked. This girl looked absolutely nothing like her parents. Her features resembled those of a foreigner. Both her parents were Japanese, and her mother was rather short. Rumours soon spread that she had perhaps consorted with a foreign man, but they lived in a remote fishing village. She simply had no chance to do so, and she was a loyal, modest woman either way. As such, those rumours disappeared almost as soon as they began. The villagers were perplexed. Yet, Despite their worries, the girl also grew up strong and healthy, although by the time she was 6, she looked entirely like a foreigner. Naturally, she spoke Japanese, but her hair was the colour of ginkgo leaves in autumn, and her eyes were blue like those of a shark. Her skin was so pale that it turned red in the sun, but when it wasn't burnt, it was said to be the colour of seashells. The local children made fun of her, calling her a foreigner, but as she grew, she became tall and well built like her father. It wasn't long until she took care of those who tried to bully her. Once the girl graduated from elementary school, 4th grade at the time, her grades were so good that the village instructor recommended that she go on to further education. The village didn't have any such schools. Her parents hesitated, but with their eldest son already working, they agreed to send her away to study. As spring and the new school year approached, a large storm swept over the village. The waves were so large that numerous ships were swept away, and the next morning, the family realized that their daughter was missing too. The villagers searched all over for her, not just in the village, but in the nearby mountains and other villages as well. However, she was nowhere to be seen. She had disappeared without a trace. It was as though she had been spirited away. Rumours then spread that, because of her features, she must have been the child of a kami-sama of the sea, sort of like the Little Mermaid, or somewhat like Princess Kaguya. But of course, nobody actually believed that. Still, they found a piece of paper inside her study desk that appeared to be written in a foreign language. Nobody, including the village instructor, could read it. But when some university students from Tokyo visited the village for study one time, they showed it to them. It's not German, English, nor French, they said. And in the end, nobody could figure out what language it was. If you're claustrophobic or scared of the dark, then perhaps the job in this next story is not for you. A young man works as a navigation officer on extra-large shipping tankers. But naturally, inspections have to be carried out quite regularly to make sure they're functioning properly. This means crawling through the small pipes that run through the ship for problems. But what happens if someone gets stuck or lost down there? Find out in Regular Inspection. I used to be a navigation officer for a maritime shipping company. Shortly after I started working there, the ship I was on pulled into a shipyard for its routine inspection. This means they granted access to various locations we normally couldn't enter, while they inspected the inside of the ship. The ship I was on at the time was an extra-large tanker, around 300 meters long, and they had to inspect the pipelines in the crude oil tank from the inside. On large tankers like this, it was around 30 meters from the deck to the ship's bottom, and the pipelines ran along the bottom of the ship. These pipelines were around 60 centimeters wide, and I don't remember exactly how long, but I think they were more than 150 meters, or maybe around 200 meters long. Thankfully, they were straight and not full of curves, but of course, inside they were pitch black. I had to go inside these pipes with my superior, and being claustrophobic, needless to say, I was trembling like crazy. I believe there was one point inside the pipes with a vertical shaft, and they warned me that if you get stuck there, there was nothing they could do to help you. Right from the get-go, it was a tough squeeze, trying to fit through the narrow gap between the valves. With plastic guards on my elbows and knees, I crawled desperately in the dark, with only a torch on hand behind my boss. We were in a shipyard in Singapore, so it was incredibly hot and humid. We entered the pipes in order to inspect them, but I was a mere underling with no sense of responsibility. I had no real leeway to inspect our surroundings at my leisure. Instead, all I really cared about was getting out of there as soon as possible. Having said that, there were still numerous other tough jobs to do at the time, so I didn't even have a chance to feel relieved once we did reach the exit. And although the pipes we entered were 60 centimeters across, I heard he had previously entered pipes that were only 45 centimeters across. Imagining crawling 200 meters in pipes that small honestly creeped me out. While I remember, these extra large tankers are generally split into about 10 or more sections, and excluding the smallest ones, they all have roughly the same floor space as a school gym. And, like I said before, they're huge open spaces about 30 meters high as well. However, the only ways in are a hatch about 1 meter long and a few manholes that are about the same size as the ones you'd see on the street. These spots are the only places light can enter, so inside you'll find a huge, empty, incredibly dimly lit space. It's a really unique atmosphere. That being said, inside you'll still find numerous pieces of thick materials poking out of the ship's bottom and walls. So, when you look in from the deck, these spaces are full of blind spots. As such, you can't really just look in from above to check everything. And if someone closes all the hatches and manholes while someone's in there, then of course, they'll be trapped. Tankers can cause massive explosions if static electricity ignites the liquid petroleum gas. So, once the oil tanks are closed, gas with an extremely low oxygen content is fed into the tank. Oxygen is then pushed out of the tank, creating conditions where explosions cannot occur. Meaning, if someone were in a tank when that happened, they would slowly suffocate in the dark. I actually once heard rumours about how they found a body once in another ship near one of these hatches. They found it covered in countless scratch marks. Well, they don't start pumping the gas until the ships have actually set sail, and they always do a head count before then, and look all over if anyone is missing, so I'm sure it was just a rumour and nothing more. But these days, they tend to do inspections in Southeast Asia to save money, so if a local worker from there got trapped in a tank and suddenly went missing, maybe they might not search so seriously for them. At any rate, being in one of those large, dimly lit spaces all alone certainly added a sense of reality to those stories. In this next story, a group of junior high students visit the beach to go camping. However, that night, one of them stumbles across something horrifying that none of them will forget for the rest of their lives. Find out why in Old Man's Head. This happened when I was in the second grade of junior high, so about 8 years ago now. I visited Goshikihama on Awaji Island with 5 classmates to go swimming and camping. We set up 2 tents in the forest by the beach, then we spent the day swimming. That evening, we made the usual curry and rice and yakisoba for dinner. Exhausted from swimming all day, I immediately fell asleep, but suddenly I woke to someone violently shaking me. It was A, who was sharing the tent with me. "I need to use the toilet," he said. "Dude, you're old enough to go by yourself," I complained. Then B, who I thought was also asleep, woke up. I want to go too, so why don't the three of us go together? The toilets were the type you often see at construction sites and such. There were 4 of them set up behind the beach huts near the forest. And so, as the 2 of them went to the toilet, I just stared out at the ocean. The beach was lit up by lights coming from the huts, and then I suddenly noticed something strange. Something black and weirdly shaped was moving back and forth on the water's edge. At first, I thought it was a clump of seaweed, and as I stared at it, suddenly it slid towards me and stopped only a few dozen centimeters from my feet. It was the head of a man in his late 30s or so, from the chin up. He was looking at me. He looked like a regular office worker you might see anywhere, with his hair parted to the side and slightly messy. But despite having just been in the water, he didn't look wet at all. I stared at him, dumbfounded, and our eyes locked on each other. Where was the rest of him? I wondered as I stared at him, forgetting for a moment how scared I was. And for the next 2 or 3 minutes, or maybe even less than that, we stared at each other on the beach. Then he turned to face the water again. For the first time, I saw the back of his head. For the first time, I let out a scream. It was like the back of his head had been caved in. There was nothing but a huge hole. A and B came tearing out of the toilets when they heard my screams. Head! The head! Was all I could manage to get out. But the old man's head had vanished while I was screaming in terror. Hearing the commotion, our other 3 friends, plus another 4 or 5 high school students who were also there, came running over. I could barely spit out what happened, and the others got angry at me for making a fuss over something so stupid and childish. Being surrounded by so many people now, I also calmed down, and realizing how silly it all was, I cried a little as I apologized. The next morning, our other 3 friends told us something interesting while we were on the ferry back home. While you guys were in the toilets, we heard a man's voice. He was saying something like, "I can't go home. I can't go home," C said. The voice woke both E and I up, D said. We left the tent to check it out, and this dark figure walked right past us. It was just a figure, but it was around the size of a person, E added. We were so scared that the 3 of us froze together, but then we heard you screaming, C said at the end. To this day, my friends still bring that night up whenever we get together, but we've all stopped going to the beach since then. A group of university students also head to the beach one night during summer, but while there, one of them suddenly goes missing. Where could he really be, and what's actually going on? Find out in Old Guy on the Beach. Our university had a dorm near the beach that could be used for training camps and such. But even if you weren't in any clubs, you could still book it for use. So, during the summer holidays, 4 of us guys decided to stay there for a night. We'd heard rumors that this place was haunted, so we were hoping we might actually experience something like that there. However, nothing terrifying happened that night. Still, we were too worked up to sleep, so we decided to head down to the beach. We messed around there for a while, but the ocean at night really is pitch black, and we were kinda drunk. So, fearing we wouldn't be able to even tell up from down anymore, we figured it would be best to go back. Calling out to make sure all 4 of us were present, we then started back for the dorm. But when we reached the gate, I realized that A, who was walking at the rear, was gone. That's weird, I thought. I called out his name and ran back down the path we'd just come from, but he was nowhere to be found. It was a straight line, so it should have been impossible for him to get lost. Did he fall into the water? I thought, panicking, and ran back to the beach. But there was no sign of him there either. We yelled for him, but there was also no response. Then we spotted an old guy walking on the beach, and we asked him if he'd seen anyone who looked like A. Can't say I have. Your friend is missing? Maybe the ocean took him. I doubt you'll find him. If he disappeared just now, he might still be underwater somewhere nearby, he said before leaving. Shit. We all went pale. One friend suggested we start looking for him in the water, but after we calmed him down, we decided it would be best to contact the police first. However, none of us had our phones on us, so we rushed back to the dorm as fast as our feet would carry us. Huffing and puffing as we arrived, a friend from another club was sitting by the entrance, drinking. The police! A's missing! He might have drowned! We screamed. For a moment, the guy's eyes went wide, but then he laughed at us. He's right there, he said. Surprised, we turned around and stared in shock. A was standing there, also huffing and puffing, while looking thoroughly fed up. Although we were surprised, we were also angry. We'd spent all that time desperately searching for him. Where the hell were you? I screamed, and he snapped back. I was there with you the whole time. What the hell is wrong with you? I had no idea what he meant. He claimed he was with us the whole time, like from when we came back from the beach the first time and thought he was missing. But then, when we reached the gate, we started carrying on about how he was missing. At first, he thought we were just messing around, but no matter how many times he yelled at us, we didn't seem to hear him and kept looking around for him. Pissed off, he even grabbed our arms and slapped us, but we just kept wandering around, calling out his name. This creeped him the hell out, but when we said we should head back to the beach, he reluctantly followed. By that point, he stopped trying to reply and just watched what we were doing. Then we turned to look at some empty space and started talking to someone he couldn't see. He cried in surprise and broke out in goosebumps, but then, because we suddenly started running back towards the dorm, he followed too. After hearing his version of events, we were more confused than scared. But still, the more we thought about it, the more horrifying it all seemed. A chill ran down my spine. I have no idea whose version of events was real, but if we hadn't run back to the gate to look for him, then would we have ever seen A again? Was that old guy down on the beach really ever there? It felt like a fox or something was playing tricks on us. But either way, we've never been back to that dorm again since. And finally this week, a young man enjoys night fishing, but when he's alone one night, he encounters something strange at his favourite spot. A lone woman who just seems to keep staring at him. Who is she and what does she want? Find out in Night Fishing. I liked to go night fishing, but on this particular night, I was all alone on the bank where 4 or 5 of us usually fished. Lucky, I thought to myself, and realizing I wouldn't have to worry about my fishing line tangling with others as it drifted in the water, I happily tossed my line out. It was a full moon and spring tide. It couldn't get any better for fishing. But the moon was directly in front of me, and its brightness was the only thing I wasn't so happy with. And for some reason, the fish weren't biting either. Or so I thought, but then suddenly I kept getting big bites. Yet, whenever I pulled the line in, there was nothing there. Most of the time, the bait was still on the hook too. Fishermen love guessing what fish might be biting by the look of the bait, but this was the first time I'd seen anything like this. How strange. Despite several disappointments, I didn't let it keep me down and kept going. This time, as the line sank, the electric float rose gently, and I realized there was something round right next to it. Because the moon was directly ahead, its light reflected off the quivering water, meaning whatever the round thing was appeared black to me. It appeared to be the size of a bowling ball. Huh? Was it a buoy of some kind? But then it sank back into the water. Eh? A finless porpoise? No, there was no way. Porpoises didn't just stop like that, and they always blew out water when they surfaced. So then, an earless seal maybe. But would they really come this far south? Plus, seals had necks. I convinced myself it had to be an animal messing around. But then, the bites stopped completely, making me even more annoyed. Putting my rod down, I grabbed a small cup of sake from the cooler I was sitting on. The wind had stopped, so the ocean was calm, like a mirror. I nibbled on some dried squid while I drank. I sighed as my nerves calmed and I was able to relax once more. Turning 90 degrees as I sat on the cooler, I turned on my headlamp. I opened the tackle box to the right of the cooler, and then, as the water was still calm, I grabbed the small float I could only just barely see. My strategy was never to miss even the smallest bite. Then, as I sat back up in my original position, something on the edge of my vision caught my eye. The top half of a woman's face was looking at me from the edge of the bank. It was like Mike Tyson himself had punched me in the guts. Her long dark hair was slightly wet, and she stared at me with piercing eyes. She was barely 1 meter away from me. My heart and ears and nose all seemed to pulse at once. But despite my shock, I didn't scream. The woman appeared to be a normal, regular person. I don't know how long we stared at each other like that, but as I slowly calmed down, I realized the woman looking at me was rather beautiful. I tried to ask what she was doing, but I could barely squeeze my own voice out. She just kept staring at me, so I tried again. What are you doing? But she didn't respond. I decided to force myself to go back to fishing. Forcing my eyes away, I turned back to face the front and, with trembling hands, got to work changing the float again. I messed up several times, and in the end I don't know whether I even tied it properly, but either way, it was done. Taking care not to shine my light on the woman, I turned to the side again to grab some bait and put it on the hook. Then I turned my headlamp off and threw the line into the water. But now there was no way I could concentrate on looking for even the smallest bites. The woman was to my right, just a little ahead of me diagonally, but behind her were numerous tetrapods, so I couldn't really properly see her head out of the corner of my eye. All I could do was ignore her completely. Before long, the float disappeared and, with trembling hands, I tried to pull it again. But again, the hook was empty. Turning my headlamp on again, I grabbed the hook dangling in midair and then turned back to my tackle box. I couldn't stop thinking about that woman, however, so, nervously, I turned in her direction. She was gone. But then I felt a presence behind me, and I jumped. It was faint, but I most definitely heard what sounded like water dripping behind me, twice. Forcing myself to keep looking ahead, I packed up my stuff, and, as I moved to the edge of the bank, I screamed at myself. "You're moving? This is where you go home, idiot!" Having fished here for so many years, I was unconsciously following the same pattern I usually did. Even under these strange circumstances, it didn't even hit me that I should actually be going home instead. What on earth was that? A crazy person? But still, it was hard to believe that a person could hang from the bank like that, or move up and down without even sensing any movement. Was it a ghost? Was I being possessed? I managed to calm myself down, but I was still confused. I kept grabbing things from my tackle box and putting them back, picking up and putting down my fishing rod, and opening and closing the tackle box. Then, after finally getting the bait ready, I turned back to the water to cast my line. And there she was. Once again, half of her face was looking right at me. I screamed. I honestly screamed. "Please, leave me alone." I was almost crying, but the woman again showed no response. Do you need something? Something you didn't finish here? I can't help you," I said between sniffles. Then I grabbed another cup of sake from my cooler. You want a drink?" She continued staring at me, so, nervously, I placed the cup before her. How about some dried squid?" I opened the bag and then placed it next to the sake. I don't have any sort of sixth sense. This is the first time anything like this has happened to me. Why are you here? Please, just leave me alone," I pleaded, crying. Then the woman slowly disappeared behind the bank. For a moment, I sat there, frozen in fear. And then, nervously, I stood up to look down into the water. There was nothing there, just gentle waves splashing against the bank. I grabbed the sake in front of me, tore the lid off, and slammed it down in one gulp. Yet, something about it was strange and made me choke it back up. It had no flavor. It was alcohol, yes, but it didn't taste like sake. I grabbed some of the dried squid and tried that, and it too had no taste. Grabbing another sake from my cooler, I hastily gulped it down too. After that, the fish started biting. More fish than I knew what to do with. But I worked silently like a zombie until morning, and when I opened my cooler to take a look at what I'd caught as I was getting ready to leave, I did a double take. Who on earth is going to eat all this fish? I never saw that woman again after that, but I do sometimes sense her presence. Occasionally, ripples appear near the floats and then, shortly after, she approaches. I always put out some sake and dried squid for her, and on those days, the fish bite like crazy. But to this day, I still have no idea who that woman is. A massive thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Scarly, Emerald, and Kenneth Kawamoto. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Toshiden, Exploring Japanese Urban Legends Volume 4, out right now. And check out our merchandise store at kowabana-shop.fourthwall.com. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.